today. As Daryl mentioned, my ministry began in Orange County, actually in LA Holiness. I was their youth pastor. And one evening, or one afternoon, Reverend Akira Crota asked me, "Oh, you want to go with me to this little Bible study we have in Orange County?" And so in 1976, I started helping out at the Orange County Church as a very young man. I think it's not possible. It was 40 years ago because I'm only 35 now. But yeah, it started that way. And so Reverend Crota brought me to Orange County. We met at the Okuba's home. And so we met together. Reverend Crota and I would lead this Bible study. He came for three weeks. And then he disappeared. And then he left me with the opportunity to learn and to grow my ministry here in Orange County. So Orange County has a very special place in my heart, the Okupa family, and just a lot of great memories. I also wanted to take the opportunity to thank you all. You're one of my supporting churches at GEMS. My ministry at GEMS is made possible because of your prayers and because of your support, and I want to extend my thanks to the church. And also I brought some information about my ministry. My ministry is going to be changing a little bit, but I did bring a little brochure. So if you'd like to learn more about what's happening in South America, I'd like to invite you to pick up this brochure. Daryl mentioned that there are Japanese in South America. There are actually more Japanese in South America than in the U.S. The U.S. has about 800,000 of Japanese descent. South America has almost 2 million. And so a lot of people don't understand why that is, but talk with me afterwards and I'll explain to you. Our passage this morning is being taken from John chapter 4, and there's an outline actually in your program. So if you'd like to open both, there's a Bible that you may have in front of you. I'm not sure. I don't know what you have in terms of Bible availability here. But we're going to be looking at John chapter 4, the passage that Lance read for us. Now, according to the Atlantic magazine, Americans are more solitary than ever before. In 1950, less than 10% of American households reported that they had only one person in the household. By 2010, nearly 27% of households had only one person. And while we understand that loneliness and being alone are two very different things, the fact is that both are on the rise. We meet fewer people now. We get together with others less. And when we get together, our bonds are less meaningful and less easy. The decrease in friendships, that is, in quality social connections, has been dramatic over the last 25 years. In 1985, only 10% of Americans said that they had no one with whom to discuss important matters, and 15% said they had only one really good friend. By 2004, 25% said they had no one to talk to, and 20% had only one close friend. We're perhaps the most hyper-socialized generation in the history of mankind. We have social media, we have email, texting, telephone, air travel, but we're one of the loneliest generations in the history of mankind. With our thumbs and with our keyboards, I think we've lost the ability to connect with others, to have conversation, to engage others in meaningful dialogue. And without that ability, I think the Church of Jesus Christ is going to be lost. The church is going to grow, not because of Facebook, not because of a website, not because it has a cool pastor, but it will grow because their people know how to make connections with the community and with the world around them. Cultivating connections to our friends, family, and community is really a key to healthy relationships and the ability of the church to reach its world for Christ. And this is really what I'm all about in terms of missions. We're about making connections with our community in order that the gospel of Jesus Christ might be shared. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to use John chapter 4 this morning as a way to perhaps give us a model of how these kinds of encounters can be cultivated and developed. And so we're going to use the example of Jesus and this relationship that he has with the Samaritan woman. And at first glance, it seems like it's a fairly straightforward conversation, but in reality, there are many barriers to this encounter even happening. It's often this way in our relationship context. There are elements that stand in the way of healthy and open relationships. It can be our personal history, it could be our prejudices, it might be our own attitudes and upbringing. But if we're to cultivate relationship skills, we need to understand how to overcome the barriers that exist between ourselves and other people. As we look at John chapter 4, we need to first understand that historically, Samaria was a region inhospitable to Jews. The fact is, Samaritans and Jews didn't like each other. Okay? The reality is that in our current day, establishing connections with the community around us isn't always easy. It isn't always convenient. We often have to stretch out of our routines and comfort zones to begin those relationships. Whether it's offering a ride to church, whether it's picking up someone for Bible study, making room in your calendar for things other than work. Now, in verse 5, we find Jesus at Sychar. Let's look at that. It says, "So he came," that is Jesus, "came to the city of Samaria called Sychar, near the parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph, and Jacob's well was there." Now the reference to Jacob and Joseph shows that Jews and Samaritans shared a common history. They trace their beginnings from Genesis through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But as you come to the time of Jesus, Samaria was a region of racially and religiously mixed Jews and Gentiles. Samaritans didn't get along with the people of Judea because the people of Judea were fiercely committed to their reputation as fully Jews. They were committed to a very strict observance of the law of Moses. Whereas the Samaritans were a mixed group, mixed racially, mixed religiously. And so the two groups really had a problem with each other. There was a lot of prejudice, there was a lot of hatred and bitterness between the Jews and the Samaritans. Bridge building, whether in Jesus' time or today with our family and friends, with those we don't know, isn't going to be an easy task. But in order for us to be carriers of the good news of Jesus Christ, we need to learn what Jesus provides in this model. Let's go on by reading verses 7 through 9. And I'm reading from the New American Standard Version here, from verse 6. "It was about the 6th hour. There came a woman of Samaria to draw water. Jesus said to her, 'Give me a drink.' For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. Therefore the Samaritan woman said to him, 'How is it that you, being a Jew, ask me for a drink, since I'm a Samaritan woman?' For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." Now these few verses tell us a lot about this woman. Going to draw water at the well was normally a community activity. The women of the village would all come together, sharing the latest news, the latest gossip. They'd be washing their kids, washing their clothes, hanging out together. You see, to be a woman back in those days, there wasn't a lot of leisure time. So going to the well was a source of enjoyment. They would go in the morning, early morning, or in the later evening to avoid the heat of the desert sun. Now, this woman was coming at the 6th hour, or in the middle of the day, all by herself, under the scorching sun. Now, there's a reason this woman came out alone. Noon was a time when it was least likely for her to run into the other women. We're going to learn later that she was probably the target of gossip and scorn. In verse 18, Jesus identifies her as a woman who's faced some marital difficulties, but that comes later. What did Jesus do here? He began by building a bridge of friendship. He began by finding common ground. These are two very different people coming from very different backgrounds, Jesus and the woman. I mean, Jesus, first of all, was a man. And in that culture and in that society, men were upheld. They were like maybe Japan, I don't know. I won't say that. But they were elevated. He was also a Jewish man, a Jewish-born man. He was cognizant of his heritage as one of God's chosen people. And third, he was a rabbi. A rabbi was a person who was held in high esteem. He was a person who had authority and respect within his own community. On the other hand, we see this woman. This woman was a woman. And back in those times, the social status of women was not much higher than cattle or property. She was a Samaritan woman. She was despised, half Jew. And third, the woman was a woman who was looked down upon within her own community. So how did Jesus manage to build a bridge between himself and this very different person? He did something very simple. He asked her a question. In fact, he asked her for a drink of water. He did something that gave her respectability and honor. Rather than ignoring her, rather than treating her in a bad way, Jesus honored her with something as simple as a request. In a desert community, the request for water was not unusual. It's not a put down like, you woman, get me water. It wasn't that kind of thing. It wasn't a top-down kind of an order. It was a simple request. And this is the first principle. The first principle here is that he found common ground with this woman. Let's look again at verse 7. It says, there came a woman of Samaria to draw water. Jesus said to her, give me a drink. For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. Therefore the Samaritan woman said to him, how is it that you, being a Jew, ask me for a drink, since I'm a Samaritan woman? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. Jesus answered and said to her, if you knew the gift of God, and who it is that says to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. She said to him, sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where, then, do you get that living water? You're not greater than our father Jacob, are you, who gave us this well, and drank of it himself, and his sons, and his cattle? Jesus answered and said to her, everyone who drinks of this water will thirst again, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him shall never thirst. But the water that I will give him will become in him a well of water springing up to eternal life. Our cultural background will greatly affect our sharing of the gospel. Knowing these cultural differences exist is really important in our sharing of the good news of Jesus Christ. See, in the Western culture, evangelistic methods tend to focus on the rational. We tend to argue on the basis of logic, evidence, and proofs. For spiritual laws, our methods tend to be almost argumentative. However, in many cultures, what's most effective is not the rational, but the relational. More important than believing is being and belonging. Knowing that changes how we think about sharing our faith with people within our culture. Although the content of the evangelistic message is important, the character of the person sharing the message is much more significant. In many cultures, the value of the message is evaluated almost completely based on the character of the person sharing the message. Now, what we have to share about Jesus might be a very good message, but if I'm a jerk, and I am sometimes, if I'm not a very good person, then it's not likely that anyone will accept my message. You see, the message and the messenger go together. Openness to the gospel message is dependent on the integrity of the person sharing the message. Therefore, our character and the relationship we have with the non-Christian forms the basis of them being able to hear the message that we share. Jesus, you'll notice, didn't begin the conversation in an antagonistic way. He maintained in the conversation a harmony in the relationship. You know, we won't be effective in our approach to people if we begin by upsetting them. I mean, that's common sense. Unfortunately, many of the methods we use start by offending people. Don't misunderstand me. Jesus did confront people. He confronted the religious leaders of his day, but they'd already exhibited their hostility and their antagonism toward him. He confronted his disciples because they were often slow to understand the truths that he had repeatedly taught them. But with regular people, Jesus worked to build bridges. Think about Nicodemus, whom Jesus met in the middle of the night. Think of Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus, do you remember that story? Small guy, short guy, heard Jesus was coming to town and wanted to see him, but he was short. And the big crowd, it was like a celebrity had come to town. So he couldn't see Jesus, so he decides to climb up a tree to look down and see if he could see Jesus. And as Jesus passed under the tree, Jesus made a connection with Zacchaeus. He says, Zacchaeus, come down. I must go to your house today. Zacchaeus was not a good man. He was a tax collector. He cheated people. And I suppose that normally, you or me maybe, we kind of get scared. And, ooh, Jesus wants to, no, I don't want to, no. And hold on to the tree and refuse to come down. But Jesus, it says that Zacchaeus came down immediately. And he invited Jesus to come to his house. That's that connection. Now looking at verse 15, let's take a look. It says, the woman said to him, Sir, give me this water, so I'll not be thirsty, nor come all the way here to draw. He said to her, Go call your husband and come here. The woman answered and said, I have no husband. Jesus said to her, You have correctly said, I have no husband, for you've had 5 husbands, and the one whom you now have is not your husband. This you have said truly. Here's the second principle. Jesus interacted with her on more than a superficial level. He showed interest in her, he listened to her, and he encouraged her to talk about herself. But he also spoke to her feelings. He spoke on an emotional level. Psychologists tell us there are essentially 5 levels of communication. Do you know what they are? 5 levels of communication. They are 1, chit-chat. Number 2, fact-sharing. Now, chit-chat is like, hi, how are you? How's it going? Fine. That's chit-chat. Number 2 is fact-sharing. Oh, isn't it a pretty day today? Okay. Number 3 are opinions. Opinions are a little bit more risky. Like say if you go up to San Francisco and say, how about those Dodgers? Now that's a foolish thing to say, but that's an opinion. I mean, really it is an opinion, but to say, oh, those Dodgers, they're great. It's setting forth an opinion. Number 4 is feelings. I'm happy, I'm sad. I was hurt by what you said to me. Those are sharing at the feeling level. And number 5 is open, honest communication, where we go the whole spectrum of that kind of, all those levels are included in our conversation. The reality is that many people never get past the second level in their conversation. Many people don't even get past the first level. Hi, how's it going? Fine. How's the job? Okay. How are the kids? They're good. If you have this kind of conversation Sunday after Sunday, it's going to get tiring. Might as well be a nightclub. As such, we need to be a community. We need to be a church where we can cultivate deep and meaningful relationships. In Jesus' case, we see that he spoke to the woman not just about the weather. He didn't just talk to her about the quality of the water. He spoke to her situation. Jesus spoke to her feelings of brokenness. We discover in these verses why she was coming to the well for water at noon. Why she wasn't a part of the community of women in the village. She had 5 husbands, and the man she was living with now was not her husband. I suppose in 2016, that isn't too shocking. You see that in the news all the time. But in Jesus' time, this woman was breaking every cultural and social taboo. She was an outcast. She was a social reject. But Jesus didn't reject her. He found a way to connect with her, and that's a challenge for us in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ. When I'm sharing with someone, I try to discover what experience that they've had that I can connect with. What struggles have we had in common? And more importantly, how can I use, or how has Jesus made a difference for me? This past August, I was in the Amazon rainforest in a small Japanese colony called Tomeasu. I was sharing Jesus with a Japanese man on the back porch of his home. And he asked a question. I mean, we were talking about Japanese culture and the Amazon and so forth. But then somewhere along the line, he asked a question. He says, how do I know that God is real? And that he even cares about me? My answer to him was, you're looking at the proof. You know, I'm the reason you can know God cares about you. You know why? Because I live in LA. I'm not Brazilian. I didn't grow up speaking Portuguese. But I'm sitting on your back porch in the middle of the Amazon rainforest, 4 hours from the largest city in the region, talking to you about Jesus. How is that even possible, except that God cares for you? I mean, imagine, what are the chances that we would come together? Kid grows up South Central LA, you know what I mean? And I'm in the rainforest of the Amazon talking to some guy about Jesus. Not some guy, this gentleman, about Jesus. The point is, God loves that man. The proof was my being there. The proof wasn't even me, even though I said it that way. The evidence was in the encounter that God himself had orchestrated. Every time we have the opportunity to sit down and talk with someone about Jesus Christ, the question may come up in their mind, how can I believe God loves me? How can I believe that God cares about me? And you can say to them, you can believe it because I'm sitting here in front of you. Because there are things that I would much rather do than to talk with you about Jesus. Because my personality is that I'm shy, I'm quiet, I don't have bravery, I'm not courageous. It frightens me to death to talk to you about Jesus. And yet that's what I'm doing. And that's evidence enough for you that God loves you. We need to communicate with people that God cares for them. Remember, we're living in the loneliest generation. In the midst of all of our social media and communication gadgets, people are lonely. And lonely people are looking for people who will show God's love and God's care to them. Maybe our friends are having problems with their marriage or problems with their children, or maybe they're lonely and they feel like they've been hurt. That's what people are hungry to hear, that they aren't alone. That they aren't the only one going through this. You know, one of the loneliest times in my life were the months and years following my divorce. You know that good people can sometimes fail in their marriages, right? That's why Pastor Darrell prayed for us this morning, for our marriages, that they would be strengthened, because the fact is that even as a pastor, I failed in my marriage. But about 7 years after my divorce, I ran into a pastor at Mount Hermon who had been one of my closest friends before my marriage failed. But in those 7 years after my divorce, he never contacted me. I took the opportunity to ask him at that Mount Hermon why he hadn't talked with me in over 7 years, knowing that I was going through a tough time. His answer was, I thought you needed space. Wrong answer. When people are going through especially difficult times, what they need are people who will take the risk to comfort and to care for them. Space is not what hurting people need. We need to know that hurting people are looking for a way not to hurt anymore. and that they're not alone. When we build bridges, we need to be willing to approach people on the feeling level. You see, if we keep our conversations at the chit-chat level, we'll never make that connection. I understand that sometimes people are protective of their personal lives. Notice that the woman brings up a theological question in verse 19. She says this, "The woman said to him, 'Sir, I perceive you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and you people say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship.'" Now, the big issue dividing the Jews and the Samaritans was, and still is, the location of their holiest of places. For the Samaritans, it was a place called Mount Gerizim. This is where Joshua first built an altar to commemorate the victory over the Canaanites. It was a place important to the Jews, but it was not their center of worship. You know where the Jews' center of worship is? Starts with a J, ends with an M. Say it together with me. Jerusalem. Thank you. All right. I want to make sure Dale's teaching you right. The timing is interesting here. Jesus speaks to the feeling level, and immediately she changes the subject. This isn't an uncommon tactic. Sometimes when people start to feel uncomfortable talking about personal and spiritual things, they'll throw in a sidetrack question. And the principle here for you is very simple. Don't get drawn into the sidetrack question. Notice that Jesus doesn't get sidetracked on the location issue. Instead, he maintains the conversation to get at the heart of the matter. And the heart issue is not location, it's the issue of worship. The heart issue isn't even about her marriages. Jesus is going for the main issue, which is how can you come to God? Christians get caught up in side issues all the time. All the time. We're going to talk about divorce, or are we going to talk about worship? Are we going to talk about lifestyle, or are we going to talk about forgiveness? Are we going to talk about righteousness, or are we going to talk about grace? Verse 21. Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, an hour is coming when neither in this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But an hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For such people the Father seeks to be his worshipers. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth." It's easy to forget when talking to people what the destination is. You know, in our conversation with people, what's the purpose? Jesus didn't forget his destination. He addressed the central issue, which was how to enter into a relationship with God. He's talking about how access to God is possible. That it isn't going to be about location, but it's going to be about the heart. It's not about her lifestyle, or it's not about her lifetime of bad choices. And as I said, evangelicals, for the most part, have gotten hung up here. The woman's response to Jesus was an incredible expression of faith. In verse 25, she says, "The woman said to him, 'I know that Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When that one comes, he will declare to us all things.' Jesus said to her, 'I who speak to you am he.'" I have to believe that Jesus was both moved and impressed by this woman's response. Not only does he affirm her statement, he actually identifies himself to her. This is something that we don't often see Jesus doing in the New Testament. We don't often want to speak at the feeling level because we don't want people to be embarrassed. Could this woman have been embarrassed in her conversation with Jesus? Actually, I don't think so. I think she'd already lost face in her community. People knew her failure. And what she needed was to find forgiveness and acceptance again. That's what the gospel offers. If we have had a similar experience with those with whom we're sharing, we really have a powerful testimony. If we can somehow connect with some experience that someone's going through, a struggle that they're experiencing, and we've had that struggle, we can connect with them. It's a tremendous testimony if we can share how Jesus Christ made a difference. To say how I've been restored, how I've been forgiven, how I experienced acceptance again. The problem is not with the message. Sometimes the problem is with the messenger. We need to refine how we interact with those around us. So if we try to share the gospel without building the bridge, without establishing common ground, without caring for people's broken hearts, then our effort to introduce Jesus will fail. And that's the sad part. Going on to the final verses of John 4:27-42. Let's look at this. It's a very interesting, comical moment. So at this point, his disciples came, and they were amazed that he had been speaking with a woman, yet no one said, "What do you seek?" or "Why do you speak with her?" So the woman left her water pot and went to the city and said to the men, "Come see a man who told me all the things I've done. This is not the Christ, is it?" They went out of the city and were coming to him. Meanwhile, the disciples were urging him, saying, "Rabbi, eat." But he said to them, "I have food to eat that you do not know about." So the disciples were saying to one another, "No one brought him anything to eat, did they?" Jesus said to them, "My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. Do not say, 'There are yet 4 months, and then comes the harvest.' Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look on the fields, that they are white to harvest." Verse 39, from that city many of the Samaritans believed in him because of the word of the woman who testified, "He told me all the things that I've done." So when the Samaritans came to Jesus, they were asking him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 days. Many more believed because of his word, and they were saying to the woman, "It's no longer because of what you said that we believe, for we have heard for ourselves and know that this one is indeed the Savior of the world." The third principle is that Jesus created a curiosity in response. He created curiosity. This is an amazing encounter with Jesus. She rushes back to town to tell others about what happened with Jesus. Verse 28 says that she left her water pot. This is an indication of her excitement. She lives in a desert community. In a desert community, you don't leave your water pot. But her enthusiasm results in a number of people coming out to see Jesus. She created a sense of curiosity. You know, in my carnal mind, I'm thinking that this woman told these men, "Here's a man who told me all that I did." And I'm sure that there were at least 5 or 6 guys who were interested in what this guy was talking about. Maybe he was talking about them. But that's only my carnal mind. That's probably not really what happened. In verse 30, we read that they went out of the city and were coming to him. Now imagine in your mind's eye these townspeople coming as a group to meet Jesus. Their images shining in the distance, their heads covered with a white cloth against the desert sun. And as Jesus looked at them coming from the town, he says, "Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look on the fields. They are white to harvest." I believe that what he was speaking about are the townspeople in their desert clothing coming out to meet Jesus, the white turbans on their heads representing the whiteness of the grain in the field. Here they came to confirm the woman's testimony. You have the disciples, bless their hearts. They were not focused on the ministry and mission opportunity. The disciples were focused on lunch. Verse 31 and 33 say, "Meanwhile, the disciples were urging him, 'Rabbi, eat.' But he said to them, 'I have food to eat that you did not know about.' So the disciples were saying to one another, 'No one brought him anything to eat, did he?'" So here's this great moment, this great evangelistic moment. People are coming to meet Jesus, to hear the good news of the gospel, and the disciples are focused on, well, let's see, you ordered the sandwich, you ordered the club, let's see, you had a hamburger,
Okay. Oh, we went to Maraca especially for you, so you have the sushi roll. And they're trying, and Rabbi, you need to eat something. And Jesus instead turns their focus and says, wait, lift up your eyes. The issue here is not lunch. The issue here are the hearts of these people who are coming to meet us. It was Jesus himself who had to turn their attention to the group that was coming. The fields are white to harvest. It's time to get to work. What's our focus as a church? Are we, like the disciples, focused on the mundane things? Are we focused on what's going to be for lunch afterwards? Or are we committed to the work of the kingdom of God? And Jesus invites us to lift up our eyes. Take our eyes off the mundane things. I have a lot of mundane things in my life that I need to lift my eyes off of, but I know what they are. Do you? Do you know what the things are that are drawing your eye down? And the reminder, again, that we have to lift up our eyes. To recognize the opportunities we have here in Cyprus and Great Orange County to reach our community for Jesus Christ. But we need to know the tools and to understand that Jesus has provided us with a model. So my encouragement to you is that we have a mission mentality, that we look to build bridges, that we look to find common ground with those people that God introduces us to. That's my encouragement to you. Let's pray together. Father God, thank you again so much for the privilege of hearing your word, to be able to see the model that Jesus provided for us in cultivating relationships. A relationship that wasn't an easy one, but one, Father, that provides us with a great example of how we can more effectively share Christ with our friends, with our family, with our community. Thank you, Lord. We pray that your grace might go before us, your Spirit might open hearts before every opportunity you give us. Thank you, we pray in Jesus' name.